Hey, good morning, everyone. How's everybody?
Good morning, Professor.
Good
Hey, good
morning,
morning,
Professor.
Angelica.
Good
Good morning,
morning.
Jeremiah. Good
Good
morning.
morning.
Good morning, Carolis. Well, I have just five people. Uh, well, the rest of the class will, as usual, be catching on, I guess, within the next 5 to 10 minutes. So, I guess I have, a few good people, right? I have few good people to start with. So, yeah, we don't have much time to waste. So let's get right to the business. So, in our last class, we basically, talked about uh, the basic types of bonds, right? And this understanding is quite crucial in understanding how the open market operation works. Now, there will be a separate topic later on, topic 5, that will that will be dedicated to bond valuation, right? Bond valuation specifically, but we already, as far as the institutional side of the bond, we have pretty much covered it. Now, so let's go into the open market operation. So we all know open market operation is one of the three tools that the Federal Reserve has under its control to implement monetary policy, right? It's a tool to implement the monetary policy with. And of those three tools, open market operation is the most preferred tool. Um, so let's assume, right, to begin, right, let's assume a zero coupon bond, U.S. Treasury bond with 30 years to maturity, right? Zero coupon. So this is a 30-year U.S. Treasury bond, but it's zero coupon, okay, meaning it's not paying any interest. So then what does that mean? This bond must sell at discount. This is a discount bond. I mean, I use discount bond. 30-year Treasury bond is not necessarily zero coupon. There are coupon 30-year coupon paying 30-year Treasury bond, but just to make our thought experiment simpler, right? A lot simpler. Just to keep it simple, I prefer to use zero coupon. Now, and I told you, in reality, you can find 30-year Treasury zero coupon bond, and you can buy it from the bank. I told you it's called U.S. savings bond. And the way U.S. savings bond works is, I also explained this in the last class. Um, they are selling for $500, right? They sell for $500 when you buy it. And if it has 30 years left, right, 30 years to maturity, and 30 years later, you will redeem, you will get $1,000. 30 years later, you'll get $1,000. So that means during this 30-year holding period, your holding period return will be 100%. It will be 100%. So 100% for 30 years, then, using the geometric average, right? Using the geometric average, if you uh, annualize it, then annually it's like 2.34%. 2.34%. Mhm. Um, so clearly, it's a lot better than CD these days, right? These days, CDs don't even pay 1%. So 30-year zero coupon treasury bond gives you guaranteed, if you hold it until maturity, right? Guaranteed 2.34%, return a year. Basically, the growth portion, right? The growth portion of this bond is, face value minus selling price of treasury. That PT, P subscript T, means price of treasury. That's the selling price, and selling price is $500. And this is basically capital gains. If you think about it, this is the capital gains over 30 years. But it's also called bond discount, because that's the price at which the bond is selling, right? And at that discount, at the discount of 500, right? The discount is the difference between the face value and the selling price. So that bond discount, it's bond discount, right? Called bond discount, but we know that's going to be the capital gains, right? That's if you hold it. I mean, think about it. At this point, at time zero, face value minus selling price is called bond discount. But at time 30, at maturity, FV minus PT is capital gains, right? And then the return is FV minus, so the capital gains over the price that you paid. Capital gains over the price you paid. So that's the return. That's the holding period return. That will be obviously 100%. And that's holding period return. But this return is called risk-free return as well. Risk-free. Of course, you might wonder, what does that F stand for? Free, risk-free. This is riskless, right? Return. Why is it? So that means return on investment on the treasury is risk-free. Why? No other bonds, corporate or government, are safer than U.S. Treasury. And why is that? Now think about it. If any company or government sells bond, right, they will have to pay it back. They will have to pay interest, right? Until maturity, they don't have to pay back principal, but they will have to pay interest. And of course, at maturity, principal and interest for the last year. But so what is the source of income for? They must have source of income to pay interest and principal back. And for governments, what is the source of income? Anybody? What is the source of income for governments?
Taxes.
Taxes, yes. Tax revenue, yes. And who was that?
Jody Ann.
Jody Ann, yes. Jody Ann, so I'll give you, Jody Ann, you got 0.25 for that. Jody Ann, 0.25, and today is 28th, and you guys are section 1101. That's FNB. All right, Jody Ann. So, yeah, tax revenue is the income for the government. Then it's not difficult to understand that the tax revenue is some percentage of the GDP of the economy. Isn't it right? Tax revenue is some percentage of the GDP of the economy, right? Now think about it. Yeah, we pay taxes, corporations pay taxes, the tax, we pay all at different tax rates. And as far as the tax is concerned, we're not paying, our top tax rates can be different, our top tax rates are different, but everyone pays, from the bottom. Taxes are paid through the brackets. There's a bottom bracket, second bracket, third bracket. As long as your income covers all those brackets, then you pay taxes, fixed tax rate in all those brackets. So rich or poor, right? Poor. If you're poor, then your top tax rate will be lower than the rich people's top tax rate. But basically, the first, as long as your income covers, first, second, third bracket, everyone pays, first, second, third bracket, rich or poor. But anyway, so if we average all of this, right? If we average all of this, then that's some percentage of the GDP of the economy. Then the question is, it is logically quite obvious that the tax revenue of the economy that has the largest GDP will be the highest, right? The tax revenue of the highest GDP, economy with highest GDP will be the highest. That means, the tax revenue is the income of the governments. So the governments with the highest tax revenue will have the highest capability to pay back, right? So, and as we take a look at the GDP of a few major economies, right? U.S. alone, this is the data as based on 2018. So of course, this data was collected in 2019. Of course, you cannot collect 2018 data during 2018, right? You can only collect it after 2018 is over. So, U.S. of course, the largest economy. U.S. alone was like 20.5 trillion U.S. GDP. And as of 2020, I believe U.S. GDP was 21 trillion or 21 or 22 trillion as of 2020. Now, European Union is an economic bloc, right? Encompassing, Germany, France, Italy, Western European nations, mostly Western European. There are also, some, former Eastern Bloc there. European Union was like $16 trillion. China was about, 14 trillion as of like 2020 or 2019. Japan, 5 trillion, right? So the reason, if you break down European Union, say that again. If you break down European Union, right? Germany, I believe Germany is about 3 trillion. France,
6407898.
All righty. If you have to speak, please turn off. If you have to speak to someone outside this class, please turn off your micro. Please mute your microphone. Okay, please mute your microphone. Now, so Germany alone is about 3-point-some trillion. France, slightly below 2-point-something trillion, 2.5, or then UK about 2.2 trillion. So regardless, there is no dispute. U.S. is the largest economy in the world, and the largest economy in the world has the largest tax revenue, And the one that the government with the largest tax revenue has the highest solvency, right? Solvency, right? Um, so that's why, think about it. When all the other governments fall, right? U.S. government will be the last one to fall, right? Meaning, all governments go bankrupt. U.S. government will be the last one to go bankrupt. And as long as, and even within the U.S. economy, when everybody falls, right? As long as there is a last person, individual, or last corporation still standing, right, to pay taxes, U.S. government will last, right? In other, ultimately, U.S. government will be the outlast. U.S. government will outlast and survive any government or any individual or any corporation. Then what would be the credit rating of such an entity? Of course, that will be the highest credit rating. No one else can have that kind of credit rating. So that's why U.S. Return on the U.S. Treasury is considered risk-free. Now, this has a very important implication to the bond market. But let's take a look at the mathematical aspect of this. So, what if suppose the selling price of the Treasury goes down? Selling price of the Treasury goes down, meaning currently 30-year zero coupon U.S. savings bond is selling for $500, but let's say it goes down to $400. Yeah.
It's Jody, and I have a question before you move on.
Mhm.
Is risk-free the same as zero risk?
Yes, that means zero risk. I mean, it may not be. There can be no 100% zero risk. Eventually, U.S. government will also go bankrupt if there is no corporation or no individual left to pay taxes. But then, before that, you will, the last person, last individual, last person or last corporation will go bankrupt. So it cannot be safer than. That means it cannot be safer than. Nothing can be safer than U.S. U.S. Treasury, right? It's not 100%, but it's as close as you can get to 100% risk-free. Okay, zero risk. All right. So, for example, what if the selling price of the Treasury goes down? As I said, it's currently selling for 500, but what if the price goes down to 400? And then the risk-free return will go up. Why? Let's think about the mechanism. It's very important to have this clear understanding. The clarity is not complex. It's very straightforward. It's based on a very simple mathematical logic. Now think about it. Why the risk-free return goes up? First of all, the numerator will go up. Isn't that right? Why? Selling price goes down, right? Selling price goes down. But what about the face value? What is the face value of the bond? Does face value change? Anyone? You forgot already, huh?
No, face value doesn't change.
Exactly. And how much? What's the face value?
Is it
Professor, you're asking what is a face value?
Yeah, what's the face value of the bond?
Isn't it like how much a bond is worth and like maturity?
No, in dollars, in dollars.
In dollars.
Just tell me in dollars what's the face value of the bond? It's just a couple of slides back, and you don't you review? I mean, I post the. I mean, it's all there. There is
Isn't it
main
1,000?
Huh?
1,000?
Yeah, it's $1,000.
Yeah.
All bonds have $1,000 face value. And who was that?
Angelica.
Okay, Angelica. So Angelica, you will get 0.25 for that answer. Yeah, all the bonds have $1,000 face value, and this face value is constant. It's fixed, right? It doesn't change. It's fixed. Um, Whatever the face value says, they will pay you at maturity that face value. So the face value doesn't change. It's 1,000, but this goes down. So what happens to the numerator? Hmm?
The numerator goes down as well.
Why does the numerator go down?
Oh
This
no,
is
the
a point.
numerator goes up and the
Okay, the numerator
denominator goes down.
denominator goes down too. So numerator goes up, denominator goes down. And what's going to happen to the entire fraction? What's going to happen to the whole fraction?
It's going to be bigger.
It's going to be bigger, yes. And who was that? Who said that?
Oh, Jody and Turner.
Okay, Jodian. So Jodian, you got another 0.25. Yeah, of course. That's look. Numerator gets bigger, denominator gets smaller, then the whole fraction will have to get bigger. It will have to go up. That's why the risk-free return goes up when selling price goes down. Right? Makes sense? Now think about it. This is the risk-free return, right? Not just the return from any other bond, but the risk-free return from the Treasury, right? So that means Treasury is the biggest player in the bond market. Think about it. In the bond market, there's U.S. government, federal government, right, represented by Treasury Department. There are corporations, there are state governments and municipal governments. But among all of these, who is the best guy? I mean, who is the safest guy? Who's the safest guy? Of course, U.S. Treasury. U.S. Treasury is the safest guy. And who is the biggest guy? U.S. Treasury. Think about it. The amount of capital they raise through amount of capital they borrow. In terms of the amount of capital they borrow, nothing can beat U.S. Treasury. So U.S. Treasury is the biggest player and the safest player. And when the safest borrower raises return, right? Raises the interest they pay, return they pay, and what will have to happen to the entire bond market? Obviously, all other bonds must pay at least something, equal to or greater than the risk-free rate. Does that make sense? Hmm? You don't understand why?
Yes, because everyone will want to follow suit because
Yeah, exactly.
it's doing
Everyone wants to remain competitive, right? I mean, the safest guy is paying now 5%. Previously, the safest guy was paying 2%, but now safest guy is paying 5%. Then, if I don't pay, I'm not as safe as him, but if I don't pay, something more than 5%, nobody will buy my bond. Everyone will run to buy Treasury, only Treasury, right? So throughout the bond market, all the companies will raise their coupon interest rate. They will all raise their coupon rate. And then the banks will also realign their rates because banks are also borrowing money, isn't it right? Uh, Banks are competing with the bond market to get your deposits. Isn't it right? If I had $10,000 And if I could go to the bond market or the bank, and if the bond market is paying higher interest rate, then I would go to the I will go to the bond market and put my money in the bond rather than putting my money in the bank. So then, not to lose their business, right? The bank will also have to follow suit, right? So throughout the economy, what happens? The overall interest rate will go up throughout the economy, right? And the opposite is true, right? It's exactly the mirror image. When the price goes up, right? Price of the treasury goes up, then the risk-free return goes down. If it happens, then all of the interest rates go down. So then we all understand when interest rate goes up, then it discourages borrowing. It becomes more difficult to borrow. So the companies borrow less. Individual households, households also borrow less. Then there's a decrease in money supply. As the money supply goes down, the entire output of the economy goes down too, right? So it cools off the economy, and the opposite is true in the opposite case. But how does the selling price of the treasury goes down? It all happens if Federal Reserve sells more treasury, right? If Federal Reserve sells more treasury. Of course, treasury securities are issued by the Treasury Department, but it goes through the window. It goes through the Federal Reserve as the window. Of course, it goes through the commercial banks as well. But the Federal Reserve does this actively, not just passively, selling treasury in the commercial bank window. That's rather passive. That's a passive action. But Federal Reserve can actively do this. So think about it. If Federal Reserve sells more treasury, that means the supply of treasury securities are going up. Think about it. When there are more things on sale, what's going to happen to the price? When there's more supply,
because it's not scarce and a lot of people are not competing for it.
Exactly, the price will go down. Of course, assuming that the price will go down when the supply goes up, because assuming that the demand is steady, demand is held steady, but suddenly there is more supply, price will have to go down. And of course, the demand for treasury has no reason to go up just suddenly, right? Demand for treasury has no reason to just jump up, suddenly. But releasing more treasury securities in the market can happen, overnight. It can. And then the opposite is true. When how does the price go down? If the Federal Reserve buys back treasury securities, buys back. When they buy back, what does that mean? Buy means demand, right? Buy means demand, right? Isn't that right? Buy means demand. So when Federal Reserve buys back, so there are treasury securities held by the investors in the market, and when Federal Reserve buys back, right? Buy is a demand. And more demand puts an upward pressure on the price, right? A strong demand pushes up the price. Therefore, price of treasury goes up. So this is, and then, return goes down. So this is something, that would make you scratch your head if you don't understand this mechanism, right? Think about it. When they say price goes up, price is going up, doesn't that sound like a good thing? Hmm? I mean, doesn't that look like? Doesn't that sound like the market is booming? Huh? When they say price is going up, uh, because when I was in my 20s, and as a just an undergrad student, uh, listening to Bloomberg News or any other economic news, right, financial news, um, on the FM rate, on TV or on FM rate. There was no CNBC at the time, but still, and there wasn't uh, there wasn't CNN in early 1980s, but CNN came around in late 1980s. I mean, CNN was probably local in early 80s, but CNN became a national channel around the late 80s. Um, but listening to financial news, then they say the anchor goes on saying, today the bond market is up, interest rates are down. So this was and then another day, the anchor says, today the bond prices are down, the interest rates are up. So that at the time I was, as an undergrad, I was just I was a liberal arts major, so obviously I had no way of, making this out because uh, there was no way of understanding this inverse relationship. Now think about it. Uh, if they say bond prices are up, it sounds like a good thing. Obviously, that means bond market is booming. The bond market is booming. But then, if the bond market is booming, why is the interest rate down? Huh? I mean, if the bond market is booming, for a liberal arts major, no understanding of economics, this when they say bond market is booming, I mean, the impression that you get is if the bond prices are up, bond market must be booming. Then the impression that you get is then the economy must be booming. And if the economy is booming, shouldn't everything go up too, right? Shouldn't the interest rate go up too? Because the economy is booming, shouldn't the banks be, more able to pay higher interest rate? I thought, this is very simplistic thinking, and of course, without any framework of thinking, and you think it is logical. I mean, there's some logic going there, right? Bond market booming, so the economy must be booming, and if the economy is booming, banks should be able to pay higher interest rate, right? But then, uh, uh, but then, it's not like that. And again, even after this class, even after learning all this, if I ask the same question, some students will still say the same thing. They won't have this fundamental understanding, fundamental logical framework. They will just say, oh, because prices are up, you will still think like me 40 years ago, as undergrad liberal arts major, just thinking that everything is beautiful. The world is, if one bond market is doing well, it would mean send out a beautiful message to the world. Market is good, economy is good. But no, it's because some people will still, say that. I mean, even if I emphasize this so much, it doesn't, it just goes into one ear and goes out of the other. A couple of days later, nothing is retained, but in their short-term memory. Look, there's no other way to commit what's in your short-term memory to transfer it into your long-term memory, it takes repetition. You have to repeat it over and over. In other words, you must review this, regurgitate over and over. That's the only way. By multiple repetition, multiple review, then what's in the short-term memory gets transferred into the long-term memory. So it stresses the importance of practice, review and practice, and review and practice, right? There's no better way. So now we understand, because of this inverse relationship between the price and return, the inverse relationship between the price and return, right? When price goes down, return goes up, and overall interest rate in the economy goes up, and overall interest rate in the economy going up is not a good thing, right? If you still think, after all these classes, after all these sessions, if you still think high interest rate must be a good thing, no, it's a good thing for the lender, but not a good thing for the borrower. And borrowers are the ones who are spreading the money supply throughout the economy. Borrowers are the ones that are propagating or spreading out the money supply throughout the economy, right? And when money supply, borrowers reduce borrowing, money supply goes down, and it has a negative feedback effect into the economy, right? So now this picture is complete. Previously, we know we knew, and because I explained it to you, you knew that there's an inverse relationship between the interest rate and the economy, right? When interest rate goes up, borrowing goes down, money supply goes down, right? Overall output of the economy goes down. Output means income, right? Output is the income unto itself. And the opposite is true. It's the mirror image. If interest rate goes down, economy goes up. But the picture didn't explain why interest rate is going up or going down. I mean, what causes the interest rate go up? What causes the interest rate to go down? Now here's the explanation. Federal Reserve is going into the bond market, and through open market operation, it lowers the selling price of the Treasury, or increases the selling price, raises the selling price of the Treasury, which will have the ripple effect throughout the economy. So this is basically how the monetary policy is conducted. Usually, you've heard of quantitative easing. What is quantitative easing? Quantitative easing is expansionary monetary policy, and the Federal Reserve has been implementing expansionary monetary policy since 2008. It has always been expansionary, right? More than 10 years, it's been expansionary. And it's called, it's been called quantitative easing. Why? Because normally, now we have to break this down into two categories. One, monetary policy, general monetary policy, and just the Fed funds rate, but they share the same root. For Fed funds rate is basically short-term interest rate, short-term. For short-term interest rate, for changing short-term interest rate, Federal Reserve generally buys and sells only Treasury bill. That's because Treasury bill is a short-term instrument. But for long-term, Federal Reserve usually, for long-term interest rate. Now this is for monetary policy. Federal Reserve buys and sells Treasury notes and Treasury bills. Now then, in quantitative easing, I've been telling you, it was also called large-scale asset purchase, large-scale asset purchase, LSAP, large-scale asset purchase. Why is it called large-scale asset purchase? Literally, quantitative easing is an easy money policy, expansionary monetary policy or easy money policy, meaning, you make the money supply, you ease up the money supply, right? You ease up the money supply on a massive scale, right? Tightening the money supply, right? And the money supply can be either expansionary or contractionary. A contractionary monetary policy tightening, right? But we haven't had any tightening since 2008. It has always been expansionary, and then quantitative easing is called why? I mean, how is it different from just expansionary monetary policy? Quantitative easing is also called large-scale asset purchase, and in large-scale asset purchase, it wasn't only Treasury securities that the Fed was buying. It was not just the Treasury securities, but also corporate bonds. The Federal Reserve also bought corporate bonds. Okay. Then think about it. If you buy something, you have to pay, right? If you buy something, you have to pay. So how does and Federal Reserve pays money to the commercial banks. I mean, they purchased Treasury securities and corporate bonds. Of course, these corporate bonds mean, high quality corporate bonds. I mean, the Federal Reserve wouldn't just purchase below triple B rated bonds. They will buy, triple B and above, right? Only. But they buy it from, buy this from the commercial banks, right? And when they sell, they also sell it to the commercial banks. And how do they pay? When they buy, how do they pay? So this is, it's called old balance sheet transaction. No cash is actually transferred, right? No cash is actually transferred. It's just a balance sheet. Back in 2009, 2010, 2012, there were three quantitative easings. Following the financial crisis, there was one in 2009, another one in 2010, and the third one in 2012. And at that time, the critics of the government were criticizing that the Federal Reserve is printing out money on a massive scale, inundating this economy with inflation. I mean, think about it. If there are a lot of huge money supply suddenly released in the economy, then eventually you will end up in inflation. No, for the last decade there was very meager inflation. There wasn't any inflation. There wasn't any inflation greater than like 3%, 4%, 5%. Only recently the inflation this year flirted around 5%. But depending on the sectors, overall inflation was just about 3% range. There was no accelerated inflation, not even a single time. in the last, more than a decade. And they were blaming, but first, think about it. They were blaming the government, but first of all, it's Federal Reserve is not government, right? That's a very, ignorant, stupid, criticism, because Federal Reserve is not government, right? But the criticism, then the criticism must be, directed at the Federal Reserve. But think about it. The financial crisis broke out in 2008, which was the tail end of the George W. Bush administration. In other words, Republican administration. And then Republican administration left the mess to the Democrat administration. In 2009, Obama came in, right? So that was the beginning of, so Obama inherited, the Democrat government inherited, this financial mess from the, and then, under Obama administration, Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke at the time implemented quantitative easing. So then the Republicans were criticizing Obama administration and the Democrats for that inflation scare, with that inflation scare, which never materialized, which never happened. But all through the Obama administration, Obama served 2 terms, there was no inflation, the economy recovered, although it took a long time, economy recovered, until it was hit by the pandemic in 2020. And then also, as I said, Federal Reserve is not the government. It's an independent organization, but the chair is appointed by the president. The chairman is appointed by the president. Chair of the Federal Reserve is appointed by the president. And then Ben Bernanke was the chair under Obama, but he was appointed. Actually, Ben Bernanke was appointed by George W. Bush, right? So Ben Bernanke is, although he served through, he served 2 terms, even through Obama administration, but he was not appointed by Obama. He was appointed by George W. Bush. So then think about it, criticizing the Obama administration by saying, well, Fed is printing out, tons of money, inundating this economy with inflation. That kind of criticism is misdirected, first of all, misdirected. And if it is correctly directed, then it should be directed at Ben Bernanke, the Fed chairman, who was appointed by the Republican president, right? So the Republicans were the critics, and then they were, in other words, if they are criticizing Ben Bernanke, then it's simply they are axing their own foot. You understand? Or, the expression is they are shooting their own foot, right? They're shooting their own foot, or they're, striking their own foot with the axe, their own axe. Okay, you understand this expression, right? And also, yeah. And also, another thing is, what was I trying to say? It escapes my mind. Oh, it's a metaphor. I mean, when they say Fed is printing, printing money, in large quantity, by droves, by tons, every day Fed is printing money, by tons, this. And if they really believe this, I mean, if they are believing that Fed is really physically printing physical money, physical dollar bills, and if they are saying that, believing that it is, then that's also very ignorant, right? Because Fed doesn't have to print money. They don't print. First of all, Federal Reserve doesn't print money. They print. I believe they print money because, but it's eventually the role of the Treasury Department. Okay, uh, uh, but Federal Reserve doesn't have to print money. Federal Reserve doesn't have to print money because it's all balance sheet transaction. So it's only a metaphor. It's only a metaphor. When they say, Fed is printing money, it's only a metaphor. It's a rhetoric. It's being used in the rhetoric to criticize the government, Democrat administration at the time. But what happens is, this is something that happens. Think about it. What is a balance sheet transaction? The balance sheet transaction is, as I said, if Federal Reserve buys Treasury securities from the commercial banks, Federal Reserve owes them money. They will have to pay them money. But without transferring actual cash, they can simply adjust their balance sheets. So this is what happens. As a simple example, suppose you got a $10,000 loan from a bank. You got a $10,000 loan. How do you receive that loan? Has anybody received a loan, got a loan from a bank?
Your account, your checking account.
Yeah. In other words, that's called a direct deposit, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes, that's correct. It gets direct deposited. So who was that? Who gave me the answer? Yeah, Jody N. So you got another 0.25 for answering that. Yeah. Some people say, you get a check. Yeah, that's also possible, but that's what was done in the old days, before the days of before the days of computers connected online, right? I mean, even in the 1970s, banks were online amongst themselves, but but before the age of internet, or I mean, prior to 1990s, most likely you would get a check. But after 1990s, and especially after 1995, all that happens is just a direct deposit. So, but then in direct deposit, do you see any actual cash? You don't see any actual cash. You don't even...
available balance going.
Exactly. It's just the available balance. Meaning that, so then that means what? Does it need actual transfer of cash? No, it doesn't. It doesn't need any actual transfer of cash. You just, you got an email that your loan was approved, and on that day, and it says email will say it will be available, like 24 hours or whatever. The next day, so you open your mobile banking app, you will see your balance is greater. Your balance is, balance has increased by 10,000. And without seeing any actual, especially when you have money in the bank, the money doesn't remain there. It goes into their central headquarters, vault, or some is retained. Some reserve is retained within the branch, right? That's called reserve requirement, right? Required reserve, right? Required reserve. Other than the required reserve, the money goes all to somewhere, to the central headquarters, and in the headquarters it gets redistributed, well, it gets loaned out or whatever, invested or whatever. So actually, money is being moved around. It doesn't remain in one place. It doesn't if you have $10,000 in your account, it doesn't have your name. Money doesn't have your name written on it. So all you have is just the digital proof that says you have $10,000 in your account, right? But without any actual cash, that gives you the power to write checks up to $10,000. Isn't that right? Without any actual cash, it gives you the power to write checks up to $10,000. Or withdraw money from ATM up to $10,000. It's just like that. Between the Federal Reserve and the commercial banks, it's the same thing. So let me show you. So this is what actually happens. So between Federal Reserve and commercial banks, they have their balance sheets show accounts receivable and accounts payable, right? Their balance sheets show. So suppose Federal Reserve buys $10 million worth of Treasury bill from a commercial bank. Okay, commercial bank used to have $10 million in Treasury bill in their asset, right? In their asset side, current asset. And then since Federal Reserve bought it, right? What happens is the Federal Reserve simply increases their asset side by 10 million, right? Plus, right? They increase their asset side by, what happened? I should do this. Federal Reserve's asset side goes up by 10 million in T-bills. And then on the commercial bank's end, the asset side of the commercial bank goes down by 1 million T-bill in T-bills, because their T-bills go down by 10 million. But their asset side will have 10 increase of 10 million in reserve. In other words, cash in reserve, right? In dollars, because Federal Reserve has now the liability of $10 million. Their liability side increases by 10 million. Federal Reserve's liability increases by 10 million. That means Federal Reserve, that's their accounts payable. Their accounts payable increases by 10 million. This increases accounts receivable, right? This is, commercial banks accounts receivable increased by 10 million. So this is like 10 million deposited into your account. And that makes the commercial bank, that enables the commercial bank to increase lending by up to 10 million. Okay, does that make sense?
Yes.
So then the commercial bank will make the loan, additional $10 million loan. An additional $10 million loan will go out into the economy, and it will have a positive feedback effect into it, because whoever borrows 10 million, I mean multiple parties will borrow a portion of it, but let's say this 10 million got loaned out. Companies that borrowed will build plant, expand their production capacity, and during the process, then they will hire a construction firm. They will purchase the production equipment from the equipment manufacturer. they pay their workers, workers spend money, that feeds back into the economy, right? It has a positive feedback effect. So, so this is called balance sheet transaction, right? Okay, so this is what happens. So in other words, no actual cash is transferred, but it increases the money supply. So this is what happens, in quantitative easing, or this is what happens in the expansionary monetary policy. In a contractionary monetary policy, it's the opposite, right? Um, but let's say, but let's get back to the Fed funds rate. So how does the Fed funds rate happen? So in Fed funds rate case, Federal Reserve, they do the same thing. They buy $10 billion of Treasury bill, especially Treasury bill is the short-term instrument. So the short-term interest rate will affect Fed funds rate because Fed funds rate is a short-term rate, and then they credit buying $10 million of T-bill from commercial banks, and they credit the commercial banks asset side. In other words, accounts receivable of the commercial bank goes up by 10 million. But now, if commercial bank has a problem now, I mean, what you might wonder, why is this a problem? Why is this a problem? They want to loan it out. They want to lend it out, but they don't find any. There is no one. Let's say there's no one trying to borrow money. There's no one trying to borrow money. Then what they will do is they will lend it out. Oops. There is no Mr. X with excellent credit score trying to borrow money. Then maybe tomorrow there will be someone, but today there is no one. And every day, the bank has something called required reserve. I talked about it. Required reserve is certain percentage that in the U.S. economy, it used to be 10%. 10%. That means we talked about. I believe we talked about that before. Checking account. The money in the checking account is. The money in the savings account is something that they can loan out to a maximum of 100%, right? But the money in the checking account is a demand deposit, so they cannot loan out 100%. And if they loan out 100%, and if there's a bank run, then the bank will go bankrupt. So there is a reserve requirement. And U.S. economy used to be 10%. Now it's 0%. But let's say on the normal situation, they have 10 million of excess reserve. They have already met the required reserve. So anything over and above required reserve is called excess reserve, right? So any excess reserve, if there's any excess reserve, and that means it's not earning any money, right? It's not earning any money. So then what do? They lend it to the Fed funds market, right? Any excess reserve, they lend it to the Fed funds market. And if there are, Now think about it. If there's a lot of excess reserve, so they all want to lend it in the in the then in the Fed funds market. What happens to supply of Fed funds? What happens to the supply of Fed funds? In other words, available funds to lend. What happens to that in the Fed funds market? Anyone?
Goes up.
Yeah, it goes up. It goes up. And then if the supply goes up, what happens to the price?
Goes down.
It goes down. And then think about it. We talked about this. Um, my computer is picking up, I mean, picks up whatever I say and try to, um, we talked about this. Interest rate is also a kind of price, isn't it right? Interest rate is also a kind of price.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interest rate is the price for what? Price for? Interest rate is
The
price
price you
for?
pay to secure, well, to get the money.
Yeah, in other words, yeah, please, you need to clean out, you need to clean up the verbiage, right? That's what, of course, when you put it into writing, then you can clean up. Yeah, just, neatly speaking, interest rate is price for borrowing money. Isn't it right?
Yes.
Interest rate is price for borrowing money. So there is an excess supply of funds in the Fed funds market. So the price for borrowing Fed funds, in other words, Fed funds rate, goes down. It goes down. Right? Makes sense? Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah, good. At least for two people, right? I believe Jody and Angelica. For two people, it makes sense at least. So that's how Federal Reserve changes the Fed funds rate through open market operation. That's how it happens, right? All this time it was um, through open market operation. Uh, that's what it happens. Okay. All righty. So it's 12:09. Uh, I think this is a good time to take a break. I couldn't just cut it up there because we were almost there about the. So it's the mechanism, and this mechanism you should be fully uh, comprehending this mechanism, and this mechanism is not that difficult. It's a straightforward logic. There's nothing cloudy about it. There's nothing. So we're gonna take a 10-minute break and come back at 12:20. Okay. Alrighty. I will stop sharing. All right, we're back. We're back. I hope you're back too. So this sums up everything about the open market operation, the major tool of monetary policy, and how it affects the money supply, and also even on a lesser scale, um, even the Fed funds rate, right? And of course, there are three tools of monetary policy: open market operation, discount rate, and reserve ratio. This will be this was all explained uh, in depth in the main lecture videos, right? Um, and everyone understands, everyone knows that the lectures that are more than 5 days old uh, can be found on YouTube, right? I gave you my YouTube channel playlist, um, so you shouldn't have any problem retrieving old videos, right? Um, so I will, skip to the rest of them. Everything is explained in the main lecture video. So now let's think about the risk, because basically bond is lending, and what are the risks involved in lending, right? Or in other words, bond investing. So obviously, the biggest concern in lending is the default risk, isn't it right? Whether you'll get your money back or not. In other words, whether the borrower will default or not, right? That's called default risk. Um, and then, so obviously, that's why you charge, higher interest. That's why you charge a higher interest rate to a riskier borrower. So so starting from the prime rate, right? Prime rate is the rate given to the most preferential, uh, highest quality borrower, right? And those borrowers are called prime category. And they generally have, uh, for individuals, they generally have credit score above 820. And for corporations, they have, credit triple A credit ratings, triple A, right? And as the credit rating goes down, like double A, single A, triple B, double B, and for individuals, credit score goes down, then obviously they present more risk. So you increase the interest rate, right? So the prime rate is, we already talked about it, conventionally about 3% of above the Fed funds rate, and Fed funds rate being, almost, 0.25%. 3% above it is like 3.25. So that, and as the default risk goes up, in other words, credit worthiness goes down, or risk goes up, then you have you apply higher interest rate. Those interest rates above, premium rate are all, it can be considered as risk premium. Progressively increasing interest rates represent risk premium, right? And the second uh, and then second risk is, inflation risk. Inflation. Um, Inflation risk is not listed. Okay, inflation that I listed here. First, I talked about default risk. Um, it ranges from 0 to 8%, 0 to up to 8%. So 0% default risk, of course, a prime category, right? And as the default risk goes up, gradually goes up. And then there is inflation risk. Maybe inflation risk is not mentioned here because inflation risk is, it's not borrower specific, right? For example, default risk is borrower specific, isn't that right? Default risk from one individual borrower to another, it's all different. So it's borrower specific. Liquidity risk is also borrower specific. Liquidity risk is the risk associated with being unable to sell the bond of little known little known issuer. Now, a bond from a little known company, it's not easy to sell. I mean, if you're already holding it. So obviously, the credit rating would have to be low. It's a little known company. Credit rating cannot be that high. So obviously, by adding risk premium, right, with higher interest rate, this incentivizes the investors to buy this bond. Okay, so that's borrower specific as well. Maturity risk and inflation risk are not borrower specific. It's simply across the board. Now, maturity risk means the risk goes up as the term of the loan goes up. In other words, as the maturity goes up, the risk goes up because long-term bond prices change more with. We all understand bond prices and interest rates move in opposite directions. I've been telling you, yeah, and I've shown you an example, hypothetical example. Theoretical example. But in reality, that's true. There's an inverse relationship between the price and interest rate, right? Everybody should be clear about that, right? Is there anyone who's not sure about this yet? The inverse relationship between the price and the return. And the long-term bond prices change more with the market rate swings than the short-term bond prices. In other words, think about it. Price of the longer the maturity, right? The longer the maturity, there is more uncertainty. The longer into the future, future is the unknown. When future is the unknown, right? The longer into the future, that means the more risk there is. And what risk are we talking about here? The risk that the price might fluctuate, the price might drop. And there may be many fluctuations. I mean, if the maturity is 1 year, obviously compared to a bond that has 30-year maturity, right? The bond with 30-year maturity has more potential price fluctuations than 1-year bond. It goes without saying. And that is mainly due to the interest rate changes, right? Over a 30-year period, there's a very good chance that the interest rate will fluctuate more than once. Interest rate will fluctuate. Interest rate fluctuates anyway every day, but the variance, right? The range of fluctuation is relatively small, right? Within the day, within a short period, it's at best, like 0.001%. But over the course of like 30 years, just like back in 2007 when interest rate went up, like by 5% over just 1 year, causing the housing market crash and causing the financial crisis. That kind of interest rate change are likely, more than unlikely, right? More likely than unlikely, right? More likely than unlikely, and not just once, but multiple times over a 30-year period. So, and if interest rate goes up, then price falls. So there will be many that uncertainty, right? Uncertainty is always the risk. The longer the maturity, the longer, the greater the risk. That's called the maturity risk. It's also called the price risk, also called interest rate risk, because it's all a result of longer maturity and potential possible fluctuations in interest rate and the resulting price changes, right? So usually, ranges between, so the difference between the short-term and long-term bonds, right? The risk premium between, short-term, long-term is generally 0 to 2%, right? And inflation risk, it's obvious, inflation risk is, across the board. If there's, so you add into the basically you factor it. You factor those risk premia into the interest rate. Okay, so finally you arrive at nominal interest rate, which is fully fully adjusted for risk premia. Basically, nominal interest rate is KPR. K stands for cost of capital. Cost of capital is another another word for interest rate. Why? Because cost of capital means cost of borrowing capital, cost of borrowing capital or raising capital. So KPR, cost of pure return. That's pure rate, pure return. So that's the real interest rate, real return, and then you adjust it for inflation, and that's nominal interest rate, what we understand as nominal interest rate. And then by fully adding in, adjusting for default risk, liquidity risk, maturity risk, then you arrive at fully adjusted, nominal interest rate, fully adjusted for every risk, right, by their risk premium. Okay, so that wraps up everything. That wraps up everything about ROI, and the first topic is already covered, and it's not really, it's not really a big thing because we are already into topic 2. We are already way into topic 2. You should all know that as of today, these are the videos that you must watch. I mean, these were already issued last Thursday. They are still available, but after today it will be gone. These are what are issued today. So you must be all caught up. You must all be caught up to this point. Okay, you must all be caught up to this point. That's the main lecture. All righty, so that's it for today. Is there any question? Any questions? Are you there?
No, no questions.
Okay, all righty. No questions. All righty, sounds good. All right, I hope
Oh,
everyone.
I do have one. Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah. Is that Jody Ann?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Okay, go on.
So, quantitative easing and large-scale asset purchase are the same, but the difference between them is that quantitative easing buys back Treasury securities, bills, bonds, and corporate bonds and commercial papers, stuff like that. And large-scale asset purchase, they buy back Treasury bills. Is that it?
No. They are the same thing. They are the same thing.
Oh,
Quantitative easing and large-scale asset purchase mean the same thing. In quantitative easing, they buy back not only treasury securities, but also corporate bonds as well, corporate bonds.
oh,
Normally, in normal scale, normal expansionary monetary policy, they only buy back treasury securities,
okay,
right?
okay,
But in quantitative easing, they even, expanded it to even corporate bonds.
okay,
So that way, more, money can be injected into the economy, right?
okay, yes.
All righty.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Any other? All right. If there are no more questions, so class is dismissed today. Hope you guys have a great rest of the day, and I will see you on Thursday. Okay?
Thank you,
All
Professor.
right.
Have a good day.
Goodbye,
All right.
Professor.
You too, Angelica. All righty. I'm okay. Signing out.
Goodbye, Professor.
Goodbye. Goodbye, everyone. Signing out and stop recording.